Have you ever felt that the world is quietly training you to disappear, to become smaller, quieter, softer, until the sharp edges of your soul fit perfectly into the mold of mediocrity? Every time you hesitate before speaking your truth, every time you hold back the fire that wants to rise in your chest, you participate in the oldest ritual of this civilization, the worship of conformity. You think you are adapting, but what is really happening is that your essence is being edited, pixel by pixel, reaction by reaction, until the original sound of your being is replaced by 1,000 borrowed voices. The world no longer needs to punish you to control you. It only needs to keep you entertained, distracted, applauded, and a little bit afraid. The algorithm doesn't want your thoughts. It wants your attention, because attention is creative energy, and whoever commands your attention commands your destiny. You don't notice it at first. It begins with small concessions, a phrase you don't say to keep the peace, a silence that costs a piece of your authenticity, a belief you repeat even when you don't feel it vibrating as truth. And soon you realize the prison was never built around you, and it was constructed within you. The walls are invisible, but you can feel them pressing on your chest. Every scroll, every comparison, every craving for validation adds another layer of glass between you and your own presence. You were not born to live this way. You were not born to be a reflection of other reflections. You were born as a source, not an echo. But the world has learned the perfect spell, to convince you that obedience is virtue and that rebellion is chaos. And so the collective hypnosis continues, a mass of souls living by imitation, measuring their worth by the applause of ghosts. Look closely. Can you feel how most people speak only to be approved, love only to be accepted, and dream only what is allowed? This is the tragedy of the fractured mind. It believes it is thinking freely, while it simply rearranges the bars of its own cage. The Hermetists knew this long before the age of algorithms. They called it the illusion of separation, the moment when the human forgets he is the operator of his own mind and starts acting like one of its programs. When you forget that the universe is mental, you become a pawn in another mind's game. But when you remember, you become the player again. Feel this truth in your bones. What manipulates you is not the world, but the unobserved part of you that still wants to belong to it. Every time you betray your own perception to please someone, you open the gates of your psychic field, and through those gates, the energies of collective fear, guilt, and dependence enter quietly, feeding on your uncertainty. Freedom, then, is not resistance, it is remembrance. To remember that you are the architect of your own vibration, that you are the witness behind the mask, that no external approval can give what only presence sustains. This is the beginning of alchemy, to take back the raw metal of your scattered attention and melt it into focus until it becomes a blade, the sword of discernment. And with that sword, you cut through every illusion that ever tried to own you. Pause now, breathe deeply, listen. The silence you avoid is not emptiness. It's the laboratory where the gold of your consciousness is forged. When you stop reacting to the noise of the world, you begin to hear your original frequency again, the one that existed before you were named, labeled, or compared. Freedom begins when obedience ends, and obedience ends when you no longer fear your own truth. The moment you stop negotiating who you are, the manipulation collapses, because the world can only control those who still doubt themselves. But once you stand in your inner fire, you become ungovernable. Not through aggression, but through clarity. Clarity is the most revolutionary force there is. The modern alchemist is not one who fights the system. He is the one who no longer needs it to define him. His rebellion is silent, a frequency of integrity that reshapes reality around him. And maybe, deep inside, you already feel it. The refusal to keep playing a role that doesn't fit your soul. The burning intuition that whispers, "I came here to remember." The fracture you feel is not a wound. It's the crack where the light enters. It's the proof that something in you refuses to be tamed, and that refusal is sacred. Maybe no one has ever truly seen what you carry. Maybe you've walked for years, holding questions that no one could answer. You didn't find this message by accident. Messages like this are not imposed. They are attracted by the resonance within you. And if something here touched you deeply, if this felt less like information and more like remembrance, then it means you have always carried the key. We are about to unveil what has been waiting for you since the beginning, and from this moment on, there is no turning back. If you felt something vibrate inside, click like right now. That small gesture is your "I am here," a signal that you are listening not only with your mind, but with your soul. And through this simple act, other seekers, just like you, will find their way back home. And if you are ready to walk further, touch the subscribe symbol below and join this living temple of conscious creators, rewriting reality from its true source. They called it freedom, but it was only a softer kind of prison, a prison decorated with choice, framed with comfort, and scented with the illusion of progress. You were told you were free because you could choose your flavor of distraction, your brand of rebellion, your costume of individuality. But freedom without awareness is nothing more than slavery dressed in mirrors. You see, control today doesn't need chains or rulers. It only needs stimulation, because a distracted mind is an obedient mind, and an obedient mind is the most efficient product ever created. They learn to feed you symbols of liberation that lead you right back into the loop, to sell you rebellion that depends on consumption, to offer you individuality that thrives on imitation, to promise transcendence while keeping you terrified of stillness. Look carefully. The cage is not outside. It's an architecture of attention. Each notification is a bell. Each outrage is a leash. Each comparison is a thread tightening around your breath. You no longer ask for truth. You ask for relevance. You no longer seek wisdom. You seek validation. You no longer explore reality. You curate your persona, and in the process, the soul grows silent, not because it has died, but because its frequency cannot vibrate in the noise of artificial urgency. The Hermetic texts warned of this age, the age when the outer light would become blinding, and the inner flame would flicker, forgotten, beneath the weight of screens. And yet the divine law never sleeps. The principle of mentalism still reigns. As within, so without. Your reality is only a mirror of your state of consciousness. So the true illusion is not the system, it's the belief that the system is stronger than your awareness. Because the moment you remember your inner sovereignty, the illusion begins to collapse. Its threads dissolve in the heat of perception. Its power drains in the light of lucidity. No one can manipulate a mind that observes itself. No one can imprison a being that no longer seeks permission to exist. The world trains you to obey impulses you didn't choose, to crave stimulation instead of silence, to equate speed with purpose and exhaustion with meaning. You think you are choosing, but choice without consciousness is only reaction. You think you are speaking, but words spoken to be accepted are just echoes of the collective fear. You think you are alive, but you are only oscillating between pleasure and anxiety, a pendulum powered by algorithms that know your pain better than you do. But deep beneath this hypnosis, something ancient still moves, a pulse older than civilization itself, the pulse of the sovereign soul, the one that remembers the taste of real freedom. You feel it sometimes, in those rare moments when the noise fades, and you can finally hear the space between thoughts. That's where your essence hides, not lost, just waiting for you to become silent enough to return. And when you do, the illusion starts to crack. You begin to notice the unseen patterns, how every reaction has been rehearsed, how every desire has been implanted, how every fear has been amplified just enough to keep you docile. You begin to sense the architecture of the invisible cage, and paradoxically, that awareness is already the beginning of escape. Because awakening is not about destroying the cage, it's about seeing it. And once it's seen, it cannot hold you anymore. The walls of illusion are made of attention. Withdraw your attention, and they fall. Refuse to feed them with fear, and they dissolve. Look at them with truth, and they vanish like shadows at dawn. The modern alchemist doesn't run from the world. He walks through it untouched, because he knows that his vibration shapes his experience, not the other way around. His rebellion is not violent, it's subtle. It's the rebellion of presence, the refusal to react, the mastery of inner fire. He observes manipulation and turns it into fuel for awareness. He witnesses fear and transmutes it into discernment. He feels anger and refines it into will. This is the alchemical rebellion. Not destruction, but transformation. Not protest, but presence. Not escape, but evolution. The illusion of freedom collapses when you no longer crave permission to exist, when you no longer need the world to confirm that you are enough, when your peace is self-generated, Then, even if the world burns, you remain untouched, not cold, but lucid, because true freedom has nothing to do with movement or choice. It is a state of vibration. It is the stillness that cannot be hypnotized. It is the gold that remains when all illusions melt away. And you, yes, you, are that gold. You always have been. You were simply conditioned to forget. Now remember. Remember what it feels like to not need permission to be. Remember the sacred weight of your own presence. Remember that awareness itself is the master key. You are not waiting to become free. You are remembering that you never weren't. Pause, breathe, and let this sink deeper than thought into that silent chamber where the real you waits. Patient, eternal, unshaken. You may feel it now, a vibration awakening beneath the words, a recognition rising from somewhere older than memory. Perhaps no one ever told you that your resistance was holy, but it is, because resistance is remembrance, and remembrance is the beginning of mastery. The first map, the one drawn in fire and silence, is already waiting for you. You'll find it in the pinned portal below. There lie the coordinates of those who remember that freedom begins inside. Follow it, enter it. The next passage begins there, where those who awaken do not stand apart, but together. Something ancient begins to move when the illusion cracks. It's not rage, it's not defiance, it's recognition, the realization that the spark within you never truly obeyed. It only pretended to sleep, waiting for the moment when truth would burn loud enough to call it back. The fire has always been there, hidden under layers of politeness, survival, distraction, smothered by centuries of conditioning. But you can't destroy what was born from the first light. You can only forget it. And now you are remembering. This remembrance is not gentle. It arrives like thunder behind your ribs. It dismantles everything false you ever built to be accepted. It doesn't ask for permission. It demands presence. The alchemical rebellion begins here, not in the streets, not on screens, but in the furnace of the psyche. It is the moment when you stop negotiating your light, when you decide that silence will no longer protect the lie. The world has told you that rebellion means destruction, but Hermetic wisdom teaches otherwise. True rebellion is transmutation. It is not about burning the world. It's about refining it through your awareness. It's not war, it's purification. And the weapon is not anger, it's clarity. Anger, when refined by clarity, becomes will. Will, when aligned with truth, becomes creation. And creation, when born from silence, becomes divine. This is the fire that refuses to obey. It is the fire of consciousness, the inner sun that no empire, ideology, or machine can extinguish. But to wield it, you must pass through the nigredo, the black phase of alchemy, the psychological night of the soul. It's the confrontation with everything in you that still wants to please, to belong, to hide. It's the part of you that trembles before your own power. In this darkness, you will meet your shadows. Fear disguised as humility, guilt disguised as morality, shame disguised as virtue. They will try to convince you to stay small, to stay predictable, to stay safe. But safety is not freedom. It's the slow death of potential. The alchemist learns to walk through that fire, not by fighting the darkness, but by holding awareness steady while everything false melts away. This is why the ancient texts called alchemy a sacred art of fire, because the furnace doesn't destroy, it reveals. The metal doesn't die, it becomes pure. The self doesn't vanish, it becomes true. The rebellion, then, is internal purification, a systematic burning of illusions, fear, dependency, conformity, approval, guilt. One by one they rise to the surface to be seen, accepted, and released into the flame. The outer world changes only when this inner metallurgy begins, because every system of control, every structure of domination is sustained by collective fear. And every time one human remembers their own light, that structure loses power. This is why every awakening is dangerous, not because you will attack the system, but because you will stop feeding it. Your silence, once shaped by fear, becomes a sword. Your stillness, once mistaken for passivity, becomes radiance. Your truth, once hidden, becomes a frequency that reprograms everything around you. The fire doesn't shout, it vibrates, it emanates, it burns quietly, but relentlessly. And those who live by illusion begin to feel it. They sense the shift in your field. the way your eyes no longer seek approval, the way your voice carries weight even in whisper. They don't know what changed, but something in them remembers too. This is how the new rebellion spreads, not by slogans or manifestos, but by vibration. One conscious being ignites another. One lucid presence stabilizes a dozen lost ones, and soon what was once hidden becomes an unstoppable contagion of clarity. This is the Brotherhood of Fire, not an organization, but a frequency, an invisible alliance of those who have remembered their inner sovereignty and refuse to live asleep. You recognize them by their calm. They move slowly, speak with precision, act with presence. They do not argue. They emanate. They do not persuade. They demonstrate. Their rebellion is coherence. The alchemical rebellion is not against the world. It is against forgetfulness. It is against the slow corrosion of consciousness through distraction. It is the refusal to kneel before anything less than truth. You become a sovereign not when you conquer others, but when no external force can hijack your attention. And that begins in the smallest acts, in breathing before reacting, in choosing silence over panic, in observing instead of consuming. These micro-acts are sacred rituals. Each one reclaims a fragment of your fire. Each one restores your will from the machinery of distraction. The rebellion is not an event. It's a daily practice of remembrance, a continuous refinement of vibration, until your very presence becomes untouchable. And when that happens, the world around you rearranges. Manipulation loses grip. Noise loses importance. Time itself begins to obey you differently, because your inner rhythm is no longer dictated by chaos, but by consciousness. You walk slower, you see more, you speak less, and yet everything you say begins to carry the weight of a law, because when you speak from truth, your words become creative forces. That's what the ancients meant when they said, "The magician commands because he vibrates in harmony with the source." This is the secret of the alchemical rebellion, to move not by reaction, but by resonance. To act not for approval, but from awareness. To serve the invisible law that sustains all life, even when the visible world calls you mad. Let them call you mad. Madness is often the name the asleep give to the awake. Let them misunderstand your calm. Calmness in chaos is rebellion in its purest form. And soon, the fire within becomes so steady, so radiant, that nothing can provoke you back into hypnosis. No insult, no storm, no seduction can pull you away from center. This is when the rebellion is complete, when your peace becomes a weapon sharper than any rage. You have not escaped the world. You have transmuted it. You are no longer reacting to the field. You are programming it. And now, everything changes, because what you embody silently awakens others louder than any speech ever could. If you're still here, it's because this truth belongs to you. You are not hearing a message. You are remembering a code, and codes awaken only when the soul is ready to live them. Pause for a moment before you move. Feel the heat in your chest. That is your inner sun, answering the call. If this fire spoke to you, if your heartbeat slowed and your breath deepened, declare your presence now. Say it silently. I remember, because every time you say it, the field grows stronger, and every time one remembers, the illusion weakens. The next transmission is already forming. A deeper descent into the laboratory of consciousness. Follow it. Stay. The path doesn't end. It spirals. Sooner or later, every seeker reaches this threshold, the place where the rebellion turns inward, where every enemy you fought outside suddenly wears your face. This is the most sacred moment of the path, and the most terrifying, because up to this point, it was easy to blame the world, the systems, the noise, the others. But now the mirror appears, and it shows you that what manipulates you is not outside, it's within. This is the law of correspondence in its purest cruelty. As within, so without. What you call manipulation is only the reflection of your unmastered emotions. What you call oppression is often the echo of your own dependency. What you call evil is the shadow of your denied power. The Hermetists warned, nothing external can enslave you unless something internal collaborates. You cannot be hypnotized without consent. You cannot be drained unless you have left your energy unguarded. You cannot be deceived unless there's a part of you that prefers the lie. And so the mirror doesn't accuse, it instructs. It reveals that the predator you fear has always been your own projection, the unhealed part of your psyche still feeding on fear and control. You rage against manipulation. Yet, how often do you manipulate yourself? How often do you convince yourself to stay small, to stay silent, to stay safe? How often do you hide from truth because comfort feels easier than clarity? These are the subtle forms of self-hypnosis, and this is where the alchemical rebellion meets its true test. Because to be truly unmanipulable, you must first confront the manipulator within, the voice that bargains with truth, the impulse that trades authenticity for belonging, the old trauma that whispers, "Don't stand out, it's dangerous to be seen." The mirror doesn't lie, but it doesn't speak either. It just reflects perfectly, mercilessly, silently, and in that silence, every mask begins to crumble. You start to see that every judgment you ever had about others was only a disguised message from your own unconscious. Every trait you hated, every flaw you mocked, was an aspect of yourself asking for light. This is what Jung called the integration of the shadow, and in Hermetic language it's the whitening of the negredo, the dawn after the black sun, when awareness reclaims the fragments it once exiled. The alchemist looks into the mirror not to judge, but to retrieve. He descends into his own underworld to rescue the exiled forces of the psyche and transform them into strength, because every unintegrated aspect of you becomes a lever that the world can use against you. Every unresolved pain becomes a door for external influence. Every repressed truth becomes a magnet for manipulation. The moment you face your shadow with compassion, those doors close, the levers break, and the field begins to heal. That's why the Hermetic warrior doesn't seek purity, he seeks wholeness. Purity rejects, wholeness integrates. Purity divides, wholeness reconciles. Purity fights darkness, wholeness sees through it. You can only become unmanipulable when there's nothing left inside you that fears being seen, because manipulation feeds on fear, and fear survives only in the dark. Once illuminated, it dissolves. This is not a moral process, it's energetic. The psyche is an ecosystem, and every denied emotion is a shadow creature wandering in your field, feeding off your attention until you turn around and look it in the eye. The act of looking, pure observation without judgment, is the highest form of alchemy. It transmutes darkness into awareness instantly. The mirror, therefore, is not your enemy, it's your greatest teacher. Every time it hurts, it's because it's showing you where your power still sleeps. When you see manipulation in the world, pause before reacting. Ask, what within me is resonating with this? Ask, what is this trying to teach me about my own vibration? Because resonance is the only language the universe speaks. You can only perceive what matches your frequency, so the outer predator is only the inner lesson, magnified. Once you learn this, you stop reacting and start decoding. The world becomes a laboratory again, a mirror of sacred precision, showing you exactly where you still leak your energy. Then you start to laugh, not with irony but with relief, because you realize the game was always yours. You were never the victim, only the dreamer, forgetting he was dreaming. And as you laugh, the tension dissolves. Guilt transforms into humility. Fear transforms into understanding. And awareness returns as a soft, steady flame. This is the alchemical white stage, when the ashes of confusion become the soil of clarity. When you finally understand that even your darkness was working for your light. And so the rebellion deepens. You stop fighting the world and begin to refine yourself. You stop attacking the mirror and start polishing it. Until your reflection no longer distorts, it shines. The manipulation you once feared becomes your compass. The triggers you once hated become your initiation, and the fire you once resisted becomes your guide. Because everything external is only a rehearsal for the inner theater of transformation. When you reach this stage, you begin to understand why the masters called the world Maya, not because it's false, but because it's reflective. It's not a trap. It's a test, and the only way out is through awareness. You will still feel anger, fear, grief, but they will no longer own you. They will pass through like clouds through sky. You will still see manipulation, but now it will dissolve at your gaze because your gaze has become light itself, and in that moment, you will finally understand what inner freedom means. To be so whole, so integrated, so aware, that nothing can pull you away from yourself again. If you made it here, you've crossed the mirror, and that is no small thing. Write it below, not as a comment, but as a seal. I choose inner freedom. This phrase is not symbolic, it's vibrational. It declares that your consciousness is sovereign. It seals your field with intention. It tells the invisible forces that you are no longer available for manipulation. Every seeker who writes it strengthens the collective field. Every declaration adds another spark to the Hermetic flame. So write it, let it echo, and then breathe, because what comes next will reveal the law that keeps you free. Human freedom has always been a fragile concept. People often imagine it as a political state, a social condition, or the absence of rules. But freedom, in its most enduring form, is psychological. It is not something that can be granted or revoked. It is something that must be understood. Freedom begins the moment you realize that what controls you is not power itself, but reaction. As long as your thoughts and emotions are dictated by external events, your mind is not yours. It belongs to the noise that commands it. The first rule of inner freedom, then, is awareness before action. Every emotion you feel, every opinion you adopt, every impulse that moves you, should be observed before it becomes movement. The observer, calm, present, analytical, is the gatekeeper of autonomy. When we say becoming unmanipulable, it doesn't mean living without influence. Influence is inevitable. We are social creatures. We absorb, mimic, and exchange energy constantly. To be unmanipulable means to know when influence is happening, to be able to trace it back to its source and to decide, consciously, whether to allow it to shape you. This is the law of mental clarity. You cannot be free from what you refuse to see. Every hidden motive, every unexamined fear, every unconscious pattern is a potential lever through which the world can move you. That is why attention is your most valuable possession. Not wealth, not power, not even knowledge, but attention. Because wherever attention goes, energy follows, and where energy flows, identity forms. So the question of freedom becomes a question of attention. Who directs it? Is it you? Or is it everything around you that demands to be seen? Modern life functions by harvesting attention. Every headline, every screen, every conflict you scroll through competes for the same limited space in your consciousness. The more fragmented that space becomes, the easier it is to steer. Psychologically, manipulation doesn't require deceit. It only requires haste. If you can be made to react faster than you can think, you can be guided without ever realizing it. Freedom, then, is slowness. It is the deliberate pause between stimulus and response. That pause is the difference between being a participant and being a puppet. When you slow down, when you observe instead of react, you begin to see how much of your life has been automated by invisible habits. You notice how fear dictates politeness, how guilt disguises itself as compassion, how conformity hides behind the language of progress. The second law of inner freedom is coherence, to align thought, emotion, and action under a single conscious direction. When those three move together, manipulation loses its entry points. The mind stops contradicting the heart, and behavior stops betraying intention. Coherence is the architecture of sovereignty. From this alignment, discernment emerges. You start to recognize which thoughts are truly yours, and which ones were implanted by repetition and reward. You begin to see how many of your beliefs were not chosen, they were inherited, and the act of re-choosing them one by one becomes liberation itself. To be free, therefore, is not to escape society, but to move through it with awareness, to think, to feel, and to act from a place that cannot be borrowed or sold. It's to remain inwardly still while everything external changes its shape. A free mind doesn't resist every influence. It filters them. It learns, adapts, refines, but never dissolves. It becomes like a clear lens, transparent, yet unbreakable. That clarity is what philosophers from Marcus Aurelius to Jung described as individuation, the process of becoming an integrated whole. For the Stoic, it is the discipline of perception. For the Hermetic thinker, the mastery of vibration. For psychology, the reconciliation of conscious and unconscious drives. Different languages, same meaning. The mind that knows itself cannot be ruled. In practical terms, this means cultivating small acts of sovereignty each day, listening fully before responding, disagreeing without hostility, setting boundaries without guilt, and maintaining attention without addiction to stimulation. Each act, however small, retrains the nervous system to operate from presence rather than reaction. That is how mental alchemy works, not through ritual, but through awareness practiced consistently until it becomes instinct. The code of inner freedom is not secret. It is written in your everyday choices. It lives in the gap between distraction and attention, between fear and curiosity, between imitation and authenticity. Every moment you choose awareness over reaction, you rewrite a part of that code, and every person who lives by it contributes to a collective field of lucidity that no algorithm can predict, no system can fully contain. So the practice is simple: pause, observe, align, act, repeat until your mind becomes transparent enough to see its own mechanisms. That transparency is not fragility, it's strength, because only what is transparent to itself cannot be deceived. If this reflection made something clearer in you, if you recognized a pattern that deserves awareness rather than guilt, take a few seconds to note it down. Literally, write it. Awareness anchored in language becomes memory. That is the first exercise of autonomy. You can also continue this exploration, a deeper analysis of attention, influence, and coherence, in the space linked below. It's a conversation about how to live awake in a distracted age, and it begins exactly where this reflection ends, in the practice of choosing what deserves your attention. For many who begin the journey of inner freedom, solitude feels like the final state. After all, awakening often begins with distance, a gradual withdrawal from the noise, the groups, the unending dialogue of imitation. But distance is not destiny. If it ends there, awareness becomes isolation, and lucidity turns into exile. The goal was never to separate from the world, but to see it clearly enough to re-enter it differently. Freedom matures when it becomes capable of relationship. The one who truly understands themselves no longer needs to hide from others. They engage from choice, not from fear. Individual clarity, when genuine, does not divide. It connects with greater precision. It allows the self to meet the collective without dissolving in it. This is the quiet strength behind every enduring community. People who can stand alone and still choose to stand together. The ancient philosophers understood this paradox. They gathered not to agree, but to think in each other's presence. Dialogue was not debate, it was reflection. Minds acting as mirrors, polishing one another through contrast. That too is alchemy. Friction turned into refinement. A free individual doesn't seek followers or dominance. They seek resonance. Resonance happens when two beings remain distinct, yet vibrate in harmony, neither consuming nor surrendering, but co-creating understanding. Such connection requires patience, listening, and the humility to be changed by another's perception without abandoning one's own. Modern culture rarely offers this. It encourages clusters of identical thought, communities built not on understanding, but on repetition. Real unity, however, is coherence among difference, a field where authenticity is not punished but amplified. To live in conscious unity means to enter relationships as a whole person. No manipulation, no projection, no silent expectation that others will complete what you haven't faced inside yourself. It means showing up aware of your own motives and alert to the boundaries of others. In that awareness, relationship becomes dialogue instead of dependency. The Hermetic metaphor of fire fits this stage well. A single flame isolated can light only a small space, but when separate flames meet without consuming one another, they create a steady field of light. This is the brotherhood, or sisterhood, of fire, individual centers of clarity forming a collective radiance. In psychological terms, this is what Carl Rogers called congruence, authenticity, expressed in interaction. When people relate from congruence, communication becomes creative. It shapes both sides without erasing difference. Each participant remains an origin point of meaning. This is why real communities are not built by algorithms or shared outrage. They are built by the discipline of attention, the willingness to perceive others as real. And perception once again begins with stillness. Only a mind not rushing to defend or persuade can truly listen. A community of attentive minds functions like an ecosystem of intelligence. Each voice refines the others. Each question expands the collective horizon. No one owns the truth, yet truth circulates freely among them. The philosopher calls this the Republic of Consciousness, a space where inner sovereignty becomes social harmony. To reach this level of relationship, you must first recognize a subtle trap. The idea that independence equals isolation. It doesn't. Isolation is the fear of influence. Independence is the mastery of it. When you can enter the world without losing your center, you transform connection itself into a practice of awareness. In practical life, conscious unity looks ordinary. A meeting where people actually listen. A friendship that allows silence. A disagreement that ends without hatred. Small, simple acts, yet each one repairs the social fabric. Freedom, at its highest octave, is relational. It means being fully yourself in the presence of others who are fully themselves. It means communicating without masks, choosing cooperation without coercion. It means belonging without dissolving. When such encounters multiply, societies begin to heal. Because a community of self-aware individuals is immune to mass manipulation, its members can no longer be divided through fear or flattery. They recognize the mechanisms and refuse to participate. Their unity is not built on sameness but on shared clarity. And this perhaps is the quiet revolution our time needs. A network of lucid minds, not driven by ideology but by perception, not united by slogans but by awareness. Each conversation held in truth adds light to that field. Each moment of genuine attention becomes an act of repair. The fire spreads, not through noise, but through example. You may not see this community, but you will begin to feel it. In every meeting where honesty feels possible, in every collaboration free from hidden competition, in every person who values presence more than display. That is the brotherhood of fire, the gathering of those who have replaced reaction with reflection. They don't escape the world, they illuminate it from within. If these ideas resonated, look around you, literally. Notice one conversation, one relationship, one space where awareness could replace habit. Start there. Share this discussion with someone who values reflection. Building lucid communities begins with two minds willing to think together. There comes a point in every journey when knowledge is no longer enough. The words, the insights, the understanding, they have served their purpose. Now what remains is the quiet decision to live what has been seen. That is the threshold you stand upon now. Everything until this moment has been preparation, the recognition of the illusion, the discovery of the fire, the confrontation with the mirror, and the rediscovery of connection. What follows is not a revelation but a choice. The choice to keep consciousness active, to stay awake when the world invites you to sleep again. Inner freedom is not a permanent state. It's a discipline of remembering. It must be renewed every day, reclaimed in every conversation, protected in every decision where comfort competes with truth. The unbreakable oath is this renewal, a personal agreement to think, feel, and act as one integrated being. It begins with integrity, the alignment between what you know and what you do. Knowledge without embodiment is decoration. When insight turns into behavior, wisdom is born. Then comes attention, the vigilant awareness of how your mind moves. Because the forces that seek to dull consciousness never rest. They return as distraction, as fear, as convenience. Attention is the firewall of freedom. Finally, there is responsibility, not the heavy moral kind, but the luminous recognition that your perception shapes reality. Every thought is a signal. Every choice is a design. Every action sends ripples through the collective field we all inhabit. This is what the Hermetic thinkers meant by, as within, so without. It was never just metaphysics, it was accountability. To rule your mind is to influence the unseen structure of the world. To refine your emotions is to purify the atmosphere of human interaction. To align your actions with awareness is to leave a trace of coherence wherever you move. Freedom, in the end, is not isolation from influence. It is the art of transforming influence into understanding. When you stop resisting or obeying blindly, you begin to collaborate consciously with life itself. This collaboration is subtle, invisible, often quiet, but it is the foundation of every transformation that endures. Because structures may change, systems may evolve, but the pattern of consciousness behind them remains the same. When that pattern shifts, everything else follows. You have felt this perhaps in moments of pure attention, when you spoke truth without rehearsing, when you acted out of clarity instead of reflex, when you met the eyes of another and saw recognition instead of judgment. Those moments are the pulse of freedom. They are proof that lucidity can exist within the ordinary. The oath is to multiply such moments, to make awareness your default, not your exception, to walk through confusion without becoming confused, to speak with conviction but without hostility, to hold presence even when no one else remembers it exists. Such steadiness may look simple, but it is the rarest form of mastery. It is how ordinary people quietly alter the collective vibration of their time. The ancient metaphor of the alchemist remains useful, not because of its mystique, but because it describes this very process, turning unrefined emotion into understanding, turning experience into perspective, turning consciousness into culture. Lead into gold was never about metal. It was about attention turned inward until it became light. When you live by that principle, you no longer depend on the world to validate you. You carry your own authority, not as arrogance, but as coherence. You move through complexity with calm, through contradiction with patience, through conflict with the clarity that comes from having nothing to prove. That is the unbreakable state. Not perfection, not control, but the quiet certainty that your peace no longer depends on circumstances. And when enough people embody this, a collective intelligence begins to form, a culture of presence, a brotherhood and sisterhood of thought, not bound by ideology, but by awareness itself. They are the unseen architects of balance. You meet them in simple places: a teacher who listens fully, a friend who speaks honestly, a stranger who treats you as if life itself were sacred. They live by no formal oath, but the same silent code moves through them: clarity, coherence, compassion. And now perhaps through you, because everything you've understood here only becomes real when lived, not in public gestures, but in the smallest moments of attention. When you pause before reacting, when you refuse to hate, when you protect your focus as if it were your most precious resource, then the code is alive. That is the oath. And once taken, it can't be broken, only forgotten or renewed. So renew it every day, not with words, but with awareness, not with promise, but with presence. The alchemist's code of inner freedom is simple: think clearly, feel honestly, act coherently, repeat until the habit becomes nature. If these reflections helped you see something familiar in a new light, acknowledge that clarity. Leave a note, a sentence, a thought that matters. Someone else may recognize themselves in it. And if you wish to continue exploring this way of seeing, there is a space dedicated to that. A community of people who practice awareness as a daily discipline, not as philosophy, but as a way of being. The link is below. You don't join it to belong. You join it to keep remembering. Because freedom, when shared consciously, becomes culture, and culture, when guided by awareness, becomes evolution.